Singapore is working to standardise 50% of project finance documents with a new initiative, Infrastructure Asia, which will work with legal service providers to use standardised tools to reduce infrastructure development time and cost. This was one of two new initiatives announced at the inaugural Asia Infrastructure Forum.
Speaking at the event, Minister in the Prime Minister's office, Indranee Rajah, says Infrastructure Asia will also develop a capacity-building program with World Bank Group. It will help train government officials who carry out the work for infrastructure projects.
Infrastructure Asia also signed several memoranda of understanding to deepen cooperation with regional governments. Ms. Indranee emphasised that partnerships between governments are key to driving sustainable infrastructure projects in the region.
You really cannot build infrastructure in the same way that we have done in the past, given climate change, given the concerns as what's happening in the environment. So we have to think of new ways to approach infrastructure, but at the same time make it sustainable.
And to shed more light on this, we have with us in studio Ms. Indranee Rajah, Minister in the Prime Minister's office, Second Minister for Finance and Education. And Ms. Indranee is also co-chair of the Singapore-Jiangsu Cooperation Council and was recently in Suzhou and Nanjing leading a team at the 13th Singapore-Jiangsu Cooperation Council meeting. All right, well, thank you so much for coming in and joining us this evening.
Thanks for having me.
So you're back from this trip. How did it go, and what were some of the big takeaways?
It went well. Suzhou Industrial Park, as you know, was the first collaboration between Singapore government and the Chinese government, and even sort of the number of years on, it still remains a flagship project, and it paved the way for many other things. So strong relationship, but going ahead and looking ahead, both Suzhou Industrial Park as well as Jiangsu region as a whole have quite a number of priorities which align with our interests.
We often talk about Singapore companies going overseas to tap into overseas opportunities. What are some of the opportunities that Singapore companies can sort of reach out to in these regions?
What was very interesting from my trip was the fact that actually now there is a common interest which goes both ways in two areas: professional services and I think innovation. So your question was, what is it in there for Singapore companies? When I spoke to some of the startups who were there in Jiangsu, for them the attraction is this: one, access to market, because China is a huge market; two, access to talent, because there are a lot of young people there who are hungry, eager to learn, and very willing to look into new technology and innovations. Three, the whole clustering effect when you have a group of companies that come together, and they do also provide funding. So it's this sort of attraction, main one being access to market for our companies. But the reverse is also true. I found that the Jiangsu companies want to internationalize. Some of them for Belt and Road type projects, but some for other kinds of projects. Which means that Singapore is actually a very good place, a hub, to sort of start your business in the region, because we're a good jumping off point, right, where you can access the region. So I think that there are opportunities both ways for our companies who want to go to China, and for the Jiangsu companies and the Suzhou Industrial Park companies who want to come out to the region.
There seems to be quite an emphasis on common interest, I suppose, and common goals. The Belt and Road Initiative covers that for various different countries as well. I'm wondering about Infrastructure Asia that sort of launched today. How are some of the initiatives that were announced there sort of tie into that?
I think the key thing about Infrastructure Asia is that it's a platform to connect supply and demand. So the one on legal documentation, for example, standardization of legal documentation, that would be helpful, because if you're a Chinese company wanting to come into the region doing infrastructure, your financing document, you don't want to have to reinvent a new document for every single country, for every market. You want to have a standard document, but obviously you have to have some customization depending on the markets as well.
And what is the likelihood that you're going to get sort of agreement or consensus quickly when it comes to that, in terms of getting those agreements, standardizing, as it were?
Well, as a former lawyer in private practice, I can tell you that the short answer to that all depends on your lawyers and how good they are. But there are a few other areas of common interest too. Jiangsu has been declared an area for free trade zones. So there's 3 areas in Jiangsu. Again, that means opportunities for Singapore companies, because when you have a free trade zone, it means that certain rules, regulations may be relaxed, and it sort of liberalizes the economic environment, and it gives you an opportunity to do that. And yet another area is innovation. You know, in Singapore, DPM Heng Swee Keat has been talking about companies innovating, encouraging Singapore companies to innovate. And when we went to Jiangsu, we found that for them it's the same challenge. They would like to get to the next level of their economic development, and innovation, advanced manufacturing, that kind of thing is important to them as well. Okay. So again, alignment of interests.
Yeah, and this was the 13th Singapore-Jiangsu Cooperation Council meeting. So
that's right.
Looking forward, we've had 13 in the past, so looking forward, where do you see sort of the challenges and also the opportunities?
Well, what's interesting is that they're at the stage of development that we are already experiencing. Their leaders shared that they have an aging population too. So they're also looking for solutions, urban solutions to deal with an elderly population, healthcare, biotech, high-tech medical R&D. Those are areas that they're very interested in. And what is important is that they have a much wider group of people on whom you can get data sets. So for Singapore researchers, that's really very interesting because it will facilitate R&D. So, you can see that there are quite a number of things that we have in common.
Yeah, certainly do. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing all your thoughts with us this evening. Ms. Indranee Rajah, Minister in the Prime Minister's Office, Second Minister for Finance and Education, and also co-chair of the Singapore-Jiangsu Cooperation Council.